Welcome to the Education Technology panel discussion as part of Newchip's March Demo Week. My name is Andrew Molchany, and I'm one of the accelerator program directors here at Newchip. I'm thrilled to be hosting this discussion today, which is focused on the future of education. And I'm delighted to be joined by founders from the Newchip network who are currently leading innovative EdTech companies themselves. The folks featured on our panel today lead companies that stretch across the education technology landscape, from engaging college and university students in an academic marketplace and really driving campus scale of those experiences, to upskilling technology professionals looking to refine their abilities in a targeted and meaningful way. My guests today are Cooper Jones, co-founder and CEO of Rah Rah, and Aaron Filous, founder and CEO of Promotable. So first, let's go through some introductions. Cooper, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and Rah Rah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, first and foremost, for having me. It's a treat to see you again, Andrew, and it's awesome to become new friends with you, Aaron. Before we were getting into this, I think we were both kind of joking about the grit that it takes to be an EdTech entrepreneur. So it's always great to speak with and learn from a like mind. As you said, Andrew, my name is Cooper Jones. I am the co-founder and the CEO of Rah Rah, and we essentially built a solution to amplify and scale and provide a relevant experience to each and every college student in America. When we think about a college campus from a literal sense, there are walls everywhere. And behind those walls, there are thousands of things and thousands of services and events and people. And in the current state, to discover and access all of these things takes place on anywhere between 50 to 100 different mediums. And this can become really challenging, especially when you think about the growth in non-traditional students and first-generation students. And we built one simple tool to provide an optimized and relevant experience to break down those walls and shed light upon all of the great things that are provided to a student outside of the classroom. When we think about it from a technical perspective, any campus has a learning management system and a student information system, one running the show on academics, the other on really an ERP of sorts. Everything outside of the classroom, as I recently said, is in 50 to 100 different apps, websites, and platforms. And so our one solution not only provides a far better experience, but it's also institutionalizing a lot of data that has long been disparate and been siloed and really been almost impossible to see in real time in a holistic sense. We recently changed our business model, which we're really excited by. One of my mentors says that it's a heck of a lot easier to sell a painkiller than a vitamin. And based upon these changes in our model, not only can we provide this really wonderful solution to any institution in America, but we can do so at zero cost and also provide that institution with multiple new and meaningful revenue streams on day one. So we really are excited and thankful for being in a position to actually be a partner to higher ed and not sell to them. We said from the beginning, higher education does not need another vendor. They need partners to lean into the future, and right now, specifically to get back up on their feet. And so we're really, really thankful and excited for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cooper. And Aaron, how about you? Tell us about Promotable.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Also, Cooper, I'm actually really happy that someone's trying to address that, because as someone who hasn't been that long since I was in school, the LMSs that you have there are really not getting the job done. But I'm Aaron Filous, founder and CEO of Promotable. And so who are we? We're a workforce accelerator, empowering professionals for high growth careers in the digital economy through expert-led, live online certified courses and data science and analytics. We're closing that data skills gap. In particular, we're focused on people who are, you're like me. You're in business. You might be on operations side or in marketing or finance, product, HR. You don't want to quit your job and become a data scientist. You want to get better at what you already do. And you just want to add a little bit of data to that skill set so that you can make those better data-driven decisions, become a little bit more independent, use better tools like Tableau or Power BI or what have you, and also be able to kind of cut through some of that jargon so you could manage your team, understand what's going on. And so we help folks like us take that on. And a lot of it is there's lots of courses out there. A lot of them are pretty generic. And you want to just learn from someone who's been there, right? So we bring on people who are data scientists, analytics people. Ultimately, not only you want to get from someone who has actually been there, get those insights, but also customize that for the next thing that you are looking to do, right? So we create a personalized experience to help you learn the data that you actually need to, whether it's upskill at your current company, taking a look at the next thing, or just solve the challenges that you're looking to solve today to get better at what you do. And that's ultimately how we like to position it.
Awesome.
Aaron, I may be a customer of yours after this panel.
we can talk offline, but
give me a discount, please.
Absolutely. No, it's just like
I'm a broke startup guy.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, we're all startup guys. No, it's just I don't know. I feel like we both come from this place, and I love your story, right? Of like there are these pain points that because we're in education, it's hard to break in, right? As a super long sales cycle, so the tools are always kind of antiquated. And that's kind of, I'm going to just jump the gun here, but that's kind of how education has kind of been up until this point. And I think we both kind of see these pain points, and it's like, let's figure out how to improve it for everyone.
Yeah, well, I think that if you were to take a pulse on the founders in the EdTech space, regardless of the landscape, whether it be upskilling or K-12 or higher ed, majority of the founders built their solution based upon their own experiences. And, at least for me, I thought about my experience in school where, I had a lot of privilege in the sense that I showed up on day one and my big sister was on campus as well. And so she was able to guide me and tell me, hey, this is where this is. This is what you would be interested in. This is how this works. And she also kept me out of trouble too, which is good. But not every student has that privilege. And if we look at the growth in enrollment in higher education, it isn't students like I was. It is veterans, and it is non-traditional students or learners. It is these first generation students. And so that's kind of why we exist in the first place.
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm that person. I don't really fit all those boxes, but I didn't have someone who's like, yeah, here's the things you should do. And part of it is like, you learn, you should have asked yourself and you should have done more. But like, sometimes I think maybe the problem, one of the problems that you're solving is you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know where to go ask. You don't know that this is even an option. It wasn't even until I was like, oh, that's a job. Like that's something I could do, right? And like one of the things that struck me going through, like I went to brand name schools, right? UCLA, Georgetown, like good places, and like and it's not like a unique experience, but like most people who are teaching you are like really smart people who are good at teaching, but often have like very academic experiences. And I found like when I was like really super interested, it was people who like had that, whether it's private sector experience, it could be like, oh yeah, when I was working at the White House, and it was like, oh, that's really cool. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the value prop too is a lot of learning happens, and some would argue majority of it happens outside of the classroom, outside of the pedagogy that's being provided to you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the best people are the ones who can actually like meld the two. It's a hard skill, right? There's a lot of practitioners who don't know what they're doing. They really wanted to be there. They really want to work hard, but they have no idea how to teach. And then you have like the opposite problem as well, where it's like, I've been through these classes where it's like someone like wrote like these like 60 slide decks and they're just like reading them.
Yeah, you just snooze. Yeah.
So two factors that are coming up as themes in what you all are saying, which are awesome. And I want to ask a couple questions about this. So there's the learner-centered, student-centered dynamic, right, that you're describing. But there's also this broader element of building community. So let's talk a little bit about the community building piece first. What are you all hearing, whether it's from customers, whether it's from end users, just stakeholders in general? Why is the development of community in the EdTech space such a critical part of successful startups and startups that last? How has that played out for you all in terms of building community amongst your stakeholders?
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think we started community first, and then like the content came almost second. And part of that is, first of all, you want to be able to give away. I love actually what you mentioned about being a partner, not selling. And that's what I feel like we do. So we have these guest talks. We'll bring in someone who they're not selling anything. They don't work for me. They literally show up and they talk about their day-to-day. Data scientists at GoGo, data scientists at McDonald's, director of marketing, and we just gonna have these like casual conversations where it's not like no pressure, very informal, and we kind of started out with like 10 people, then 20 people, and then a couple of weeks ago I had like 100 people, right? And so it's like people come because they get to ask questions, they get to learn, and they also get to meet other people who are doing similar things, right? Because I think one of the things, like to your point, right, whereas like if you aren't able to ask someone, you can't really see if what you're doing is right, or if like your interpretation is right, or like that other perspective, and being able to say, hey, what are you doing? Oh yeah, that's cool. Like I think that's actually what I need. And it's like, oh, that's a thing. And you can actually kind of have those conversations, break down those barriers, kind of cut through some of the like buzzwords, and really like learn something that actually matters and that you can actually take back and apply, whether it's to your job or whatever else you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And to add on to that, or at least give my take, I mean, there's a reason that the name of our business is Rah Rah, but the product is a community engagement system. A college campus serves as an anchor of community to so many people, not just the enrolled students, but the employees, the community or the town that it is in. There's a town and gown relationship that is an area for improvement, the alumni, so many different stakeholders. And I think that higher education, and in general, it's been very challenging to quantify the actual economic value of community. There was a recent article about this on Medium that maybe I'll share with you all afterwards, but specifically on a college campus, there was a recent study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which those folks are a hell of a lot smarter than I am, but they essentially determined when we are in a recession. But they did a 2-year study on a few traditional campuses. And over the course of that study, they realized that there was an additional 14% return on education for every single student just by being there. And that's a huge number when you think about the amount of money that's being paid for these institutions, or for the enrollment or tuition, excuse me. And, that needs to be brought out because there is value in the traditional landscape. Now, that's obviously changing, and we could go super deep on that and why, I am long on certain aspects of traditional education and the traditional campus. And I'm also, helping to convert some bearish outlooks on that. But at the end of the day, there's so much value to be driven by those things that are happening on the community. And how we thought about it, and I think it's differentiating versus what some of the current players are, is that you can't just assume that someone's going to engage in the community day one. And that's especially the case on a college campus. If you don't know about something, then you're not going to do something. And so, there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to solve this solve this engagement problem. And the reality is, it's really a communication problem that you have to solve first, and then the engagement problem becomes naturally solved afterwards. So, those are kind of the takes on it. But I think that whether it is upskilling, K-12, higher education, community is such an important factor because you're making real life impact. At least in our perspective, the way we think about it, why we respect the industry that we serve so much, is it's a differentiating factor for America. But it is, literally higher education in America creates and enables our middle class in a lot of ways. And that's actually why there's such value in businesses like Promotable or other, code academies or upskilling, because that's kind of a new replacement, or it's a new entrant to creating that middle class. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it all comes back to community in the first place. I don't know if that answered your question. I get fired up sometimes and trail off a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let's zoom out for a second, right? We're talking a lot about the student perspective, the experience of plugging into these communities and what that means institutionally or what that means professionally. In the EdTech landscape overall, let's talk about innovation. If you had to summarize it or generalize it, I would say that the last 10 to 15 years was really about converting what were traditionally, in-person academic or professional skill experiences that were done in person and putting them online. And now we're starting to see organic development of new opportunities that are happening. Where do you all see innovation really, in exciting ways in the EdTech space? Like you mentioned, Cooper, in the K-12 space, higher ed or professional, services. What's exciting for you all right now about innovation, and what does that mean for your businesses going forward?
Yeah. I think from our perspective, there's never been more of a catalyst for innovation in the higher education space than what has occurred over the last 11 months. Higher education has typically been a laggard when it comes to innovation in general, and you could blame that on bureaucracy. You could blame that on a lot of things, and for some reasons, for some reasons, I think that it's a good thing because they're hypersensitive and hyperprotective of their community. Going back to that. And that's good in a lot of ways. But what this pandemic has caused is an awakening to the need to innovate. Specifically, what we are seeing on two different fronts. One is institutions are really, over the last 11 months, they've only invested in software that's helping them keep the lights on or helping them further their core mission. And so it's really challenging to be a nice to have and a need to have world. And I think moreover, what you're seeing is institutions are going to be innovating on new ways that they can drive value and ultimately drive revenue to their institution, because state funding is drying up, enrollment is not what it once was, and what most people don't talk about, in 2026, enrollment's going to fall off of a cliff by about 15%. Not because higher ed did anything wrong. If you go backwards 18 years, 2008 was a financial crisis. People had less kids. And so there's just 15% less people that are going to be interested in and exploring higher education. And so between now and then, institutions have to innovate to look for new opportunities in revenue, but also in capturing students, which is why you're seeing such a growth in non-traditional students, and why these value props and these partnerships are starting to take place between large businesses and the institutions themselves. It's why Guild Education is now I think a multi-billion-dollar business, because they've provided that bridge of sorts. The other way in which we are seeing higher education innovate is on security. It's actually something that's being caused by the federal government, but because so many of these institutions are research institutions with grants being funded by the government, they are now having to comply by certain different clauses and security measures. And it's a green space opportunity to enable all of that security optimization over the next few years. And there's a lot of work to be done. And so those are kind of the two main areas. And I guess the third, and I apologize, is higher education, historically speaking, and even to this day to a degree, has been an open and a closed door. You go there for 2 years, you go there for 4 years, maybe you go there for 6, depending on having a good time or taking your time or having a specialized degree. And that's kind of been it. And you're going to start seeing a shift in higher education going from that open and closed door to a revolving door to enable that lifelong learner. And again, that's going to come back to community, because if you are going to want someone to, have 2 years to get a certain degree or a certain certificate, go into the workforce and come back, it's going to be drawn down upon their experience that they had.
Absolutely. Aaron, how about for you, both on the innovation front, and then I like the direction that's going around creating lifelong learners, certainly really relevant for Promotable.
Yeah, absolutely. That the continuous learning, because when you think about, you learn something and then we've seen this even the last 5 years, right? Whether it's particular tech skills, coding languages you were supposed to learn 3 years ago, and now you want to learn something different. So that being, I think, the trend that I like is kind of learning how to learn, learning how to be flexible, learning how to adapt. That's one of the things that we try and teach. I think when you think about the innovations, there's been a lot around, first it was hard skills, generically, let's learn data, let's learn coding. Now people are starting to ask, so what? Or I want this for this. How am I supposed to use this? And what I do also like is that, businesses are starting to ask that question as well, because it's let's do this with a purpose. So for Promotable, we always try and do that and put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? It's when you've never been the person who has to hire someone and do that interview, you don't really know what you're looking for. But now that you are, you can say, oh, well, actually, you go back and think of what you learned in undergrad. Actually, most of this is totally worthless, right? It's you learn stuff that's really important. And I think there's a separate debate about whether we should just stop having undergrad and go straight to coding boot camps or whatever. And I'm actually totally opposed to that, because I think there's a lot of things you pick up from like the community and being there and learning all the things that like you need to learn to adapt and being able to pick things up. But having that, so what, like in our case, like it's not just data skills, right? It's data to be a better marketer, be a better product manager, better solve these kinds of problems, right? That's really important. And I think the other thing that we're starting to see is thinking about what else it takes. Like most schools will not say that their job is to prepare you for the working world. They say their job is to educate you. And I think there should be both to that. We're starting to see that. One of the ways that we're trying to do that, for example, is, we'll do not just a passion project, but let's say, hey, do you want to get a job at this kind of company in this kind of industry? Great. Let's pull something that looks like that. So when you talk to a hiring manager, like we know these questions, right? We know what they ask. Let's make something that will actually inform them that you actually get it. You know how to do it, why to do it, and what matters to them versus just something generic. And so we're trying to incorporate all of that into our content as well.
It's really interesting.
Add to that a little bit. We talked a lot about, Aaron, you just talked a lot about, those kind of call it medium to hard skills in a way, and how you all are enabling that and the value of that. At least, one of the other things that we are seeing is institutions are heavily starting to invest in soft skill development. And so you're seeing a lot of, centers for professional development, centers for relationship development, all those sorts of things, so that you do understand, you have this degree in marketing, you have a marketing job, but how do you actually move up? How do you actually, instill genuine value in relationships? And that's through knowing, how to work your way up through the working world and all those sorts of things. And so it's kind of interesting to see the proliferation of, the great companies like Promotable and all these others, but also these institutions that are kind of looking at it from a little bit of a completely different lens as well, which there is value to that, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely stuff like the initial not first wave, but like next step after like developing LMSs and starting to put things online was, let's create like the entry point, like breaking into data, breaking into product, breaking into whatever, right? Marketing. And then now it's kind of like, what's next, right? And so for us, that's kind of where we're at. For those people who are like, well, I have a job, I'm a marketing analyst or marketing manager or whatever, but like, how do I take it to the next step? And that's really learning how to be adaptable, make that pivot and say, well, I have this really cool, like I'm an amazing marketer, but if I learn this thing and apply it to marketing, I'll be even better. Like that might be the thing that makes you. Yeah. Exactly.
Especially for you all.
You're in consulting. I feel like that's like, or we're in consulting, right? I feel like that's like half your job is being able to like take all these things you've done in the past, reapply that to the next thing. So you've ingested that data and now you can apply those lessons.
Yeah. And I think any entrepreneur, regardless of industry, is going to tell you that they're a lifelong learner in ways. Yeah. And even, for us, our first, round of investment that we closed a while back, it didn't come from pitching someone and asking for money. It came from asking good questions and learning and listening and adapting to where we ultimately earn their trust. And that's paid dividends by asking for advice and looking around corners that you're not quite yet seeing, or asking what those corners are. So it's just so important for anyone and everyone.
Yeah, I mean, asking is if you're not doing that, it's you definitely going back to community. I mean, that's like the other reason why we have it, right? Is so you can say, hey, what do you want to learn? What's important to you? Why are you here? How can I help you? How can I make your life better?
It's a perfect segue, both of those points, to this next question about, so if we're developing community, if we're creating a stronger sense of lifelong learning and commitment to that community and those skills over time, I would guess that it becomes maybe harder, or at least more important, to communicate return on investment and lifetime value. Let's talk about that a little bit in terms of either talking to investors or potential customers. How do you measure return on investment if the potential for that relationship and that community aspect goes much farther into the future than the actual term of whatever degree or course that users at those institutions are a part of?
Yeah, it's hard. I think first and foremost, you need to be consistent. You need to be clear. You need to be transparent and honest, obviously. But, for us in general, I mean, admittedly, we got kicked in the teeth with COVID. We pre-COVID, we were forecasting a couple $1 million worth of revenue, and we're, just so thankful for that and humbled by it. COVID hits and it all went away. And so that was a really tough couple of months to communicate that to investors. It's like, hey, I got to be honest with you. Like, we've got a great Cadillac solution here. We built it in the right way, but higher ed is frozen, and higher education at the same time, they weren't looking for anything. Frankly, they had more important things to worry about, like the safety and the well-being of their students. And so, what I think it ultimately came down to was listening and was learning. And, I'm thankful that we adapted accordingly, because, just as I said earlier, to put a number on the strength of a community has always been really hard. I mean, it took those economists 3 years to do that. And for us, originally, the only ROI would be an increase in enrollment, an increase in alumni engagement, an increase in retention. And those data points and proof points do take time. And so that was always challenging, but we're always very transparent about that. And because of our commitment to listening and to learning from the market, we were able to kind of actually completely revitalize our business model, where now it's like, we're not a cost center to the institution, we're a revenue generator. And so now it's simple math, where we can go to an institution and there's a cost of doing nothing now. And what's important for us is that while we are generating, multiple and meaningful revenue streams for institutions at a time when they need it most, and we that's how we make money as well, is from those revenue streams, is, that we still maintain that enterprise value that our solution provides. Because if we can do that, and as we're kind of seeing, we are doing that, it's a really big differentiating factor, because now you can make money on the front end, and treat it as an investment rather than, just on the back end or whatever it may be. And so it's so important. And I think it all comes back to listening and learning, and, that transition from, hey, this could work, this could increase your, retention, which is going to equate to X amount of dollars in enrollment revenue increases, to, hey, this is exactly on day one how much money we could project to make you. And on top of that, you're going to see this long-term value in increased retention, all those sorts of things. And not only is it, just drastically increased our value proposition, but it's also increased our sales cycle time. That's one of those notoriously challenging things. And that's why a lot of, generalist investors kind of go like this to higher ed, is because of that challenging sales cycle. And we are zero cost. And so we're avoiding the procurement process. We don't have to deal with that 6-month process. And that's been a blessing. We're worried about that, in the sense of how are we going to handle or manage the growth that we're kind of experiencing. But again, that all comes back to what we talked about, which is listening and learning, and ultimately being transparent about those things.
Aaron, how about for you? How do you message that return on investment in various ways?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways, right? I agree, it's definitely hard, and it starts with listening, because ultimately, I think two things. Like, one, like, your ROI is going to be very dependent on that stakeholder, right? So when we're working with companies, it's like, well, what are you're ultimately, you want to upskill some of these employees so that they can take on these higher value added, roles, which are really, if you want to go out, you could go out and hire for them. You're going to have, you're going to have to go pay them, twice what you're paying the current person. You're going to lose that person's institutional knowledge. You're going to have to spend 6 months interviewing and all of that. When you have this opportunity of saying, oh, here's what I need, let me go out and actually make a small investment in the team that I have, that I like, that I know well. And so you're able to really actually even calculate that ROI, because that, some of these, I like the word cost center, right? Like, some of these things like recruiting, right, is very expensive. And it's also things that we don't talk about in terms of expenses is time, right? Like, if it's going to take you 6 months, however many interviews, most roles, like new hires, we're talking about like 2 to 3, maybe even 4 times that person's salary in both lost productivity and like on-ramping. And then you have on the other hand, and right, you have like, when I talk to someone, I think being transparent is the most important thing, and listening to what they want. When I say, hey, why do you want to dive deeper into data? Why is this important to you? Is it to solve this particular challenge at work? Okay, well, there's an ROI for that, right? Or is it, I want to look at this kind of new opportunity? There's that. And then you have, other places where you have like the income share agreement model. I have my, criticisms of parts of that model. I think when implemented well, you're able to say, hey, I'm going to invest in you. And in the same way that like we're startups, we're looking for investment, right? Those investors want a return. In the same way that, hey, I'm going to invest 20 grand in resources into you to help you get this goal that you're looking for. You're going to do your part by working really hard. You're going to get this opportunity, which means you're going to get, a substantially higher salary or this role that is really important to you. We're going to get that return. And I think, as long as you can articulate that and put that down and set those ground rules and just make sure that we're hitting the same thing and we've aligned expectations and aligned incentives, I think there's real opportunity to have those kind of conversations.
Absolutely. Let's kind of come back to the overall topic of our discussion today, the future of education. So pretty bluntly, is the future of education and EdTech bright? Does it look bright for you all? What do you think? What's coming that is exciting for you all as founders and leaders of your companies?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the future of EdTech is definitely bright. I think we're from like a business standpoint, I think both companies, investors are starting to warm to the idea that actually there is a way to provide services, educate people, generally do good, and build sustainable opportunities in businesses. I think, because of COVID, people have thought about how do I provide that same value but lower the cost so I can scale it. So we could do these things at large. And they're also taking a look at where's like all the wasteful spending? Where are all the things that we don't really need that we thought we had or we thought we needed? And how do we redistribute, that budget towards something that actually is going to be way more valuable for this particular student? Maybe it's a smaller segment, right? Maybe it's focusing on like different groups or what have you. Or it's actually showing you how to leverage that community, right? Because I had no idea how to use my community, and I went to like Good Locos, right? And just because no one said here, they're go to the career center. Oh, well, how are they going to help me, right? It's like, what are they going to do? And it's like, oh no, you should have done these 10 things. So there's lots of places, I think, but overall, I think there's a lot more opportunity. There's a lot more people thinking about it. I think, and because there's upside, now we're having a lot more focus on the future of education. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I can, speak very, in depth about the higher education space. I'm an absolute novice in upskilling and all those other things. But before getting into higher ed, we're actually seeing that this year, across the spectrum. I think ed tech companies in general returned more on investment than they ever have historically in 2020. And I think one of the beauties of ed tech is that you can build a very capital efficient business that provides a really large return, so long as you're building a product that is, with the times, is actually catching the wave. It's something that I'm going to sound like such a dork quoting Steve Jobs, but he said, he said one time that, surfing is the most fun thing in the world. And that's if you catch the wave. But the worst thing in the world is paddling, trying to catch up to that. And I think that a lot of companies are really, really benefiting from being on that wave. We're seeing this in the K-12 space where Nearpod just sold for, I think it was $750 million, and they raised 21 million. And so it's just a spectacular return. But that's because the product, and then obviously the team and the value that they provided, but the product itself was very much with the times of what the K-12 space needed. And it's the same reason I referenced them earlier, seeing Guild Education. It's another product that was very much with the times. Specifically on higher ed, you're going to see some institutions close. And you're going to see the media talk a ton about that from both sides. And it's inevitable. And I think that, in ways, higher education was due for a bit of a correction on that. And it did need to kind of get reset, or will get reset over the next couple of years, with some closures and mergers. But at the same time, there's no better time to be, in the technology space serving higher education, because there's so much innovation that is going to come, because it has to. Because COVID has been a catalyst for the need to innovate. Higher education has always been this house on a hill that's like, well, we don't need to. We're this, or we're this, or we're this. And that isn't just the Harvards of the world. That's across the board. Mm-hmm. And that behavior and that mindset is now changed. And so these institutions are very much looking into how they lean into the digital age, very much looking into how they survive post 2026 and even well beyond that. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation. I think you're going to see a lot of partnerships between corporations and businesses. I think you're going to see a lot of partnerships between institutions and companies like Promotable or other businesses like that. And those are all the things that higher education is now woken up to needing to do in order to not just survive, but actually thrive in the future.
Yeah, I hands down agree. I mean, it was exactly what you said. I mean, when you think about like a lot of these institutions, there's like, they've been teaching the same thing kind of over and over and over again. And just it's not to say that you should do exactly what your students ask you to do, right? There is a middle ground. Like there's a reason there's a pedagogy, there's a reason that you teach what you teach, but there's also ways that like, how do you shorten the cycle of the development cycle, right? And that's at this point working with, or starting to work with companies like us, like we're working with a university partner for that same reason, right? So instead of taking them, 3 years to create a new tool, we can say, hey, actually, I took these classes. I think it's really good, and I think we could make it 10 times better by taking our experience and adding that for your students, and really kind of. It's a win-win at the end of the day. It's like we're helping them stay relevant and prepare their students for the jobs that they're actually going to be doing afterwards.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think, it's a simple term, but it's hard to do, but a win-win. I think that is the key specifically to, selling into the institutional side of higher education, whether it is K-12 or higher ed. You have to clearly convey a win-win-win-win-win for every single stakeholder that your solution is impacting. And I think that if you can do that, then you, as a business, will win. And more importantly than win is you're going to provide value. And, we kicked off this conversation. We talked about, being gritty in the ed tech space, but ultimately we do it because this is doing well by doing good, or at least attempting to. And so that's what it all comes down to.
Exactly. I mean, it comes back to one of the things you said earlier, where it's like, we don't sell, we partner. And I mean, I think that as well. Like when I talk to someone, I'm like, well, how can I help you get better, right? What do you want? Let me show you how this actually fits in there. But ultimately, it's because I think it will, right? It's like I think if you go into it thinking all you're going to do is sell, that's not going to be helpful. It's like, how can I add value for you? How can I make this work for you? I want you to be successful.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, even, in my space, there's a graveyard of ed tech companies that were, focused on serving the higher education space, but they got caught up in trying to sell and trying to sell and trying to sell. And they may have landed a few, institutions as customers, but because of that rush to build blindly and sell quickly, there's a big discrepancy between those promises made and the promises kept. And it's a highly referential market. And so, you may start off hot, but, a lot of companies fail, 3, 4, 5 years in, and that's because they weren't focused on actually solving a problem. And if you focus on that,
once you get sorry for talking over you. I was going to say, I mean, once you get that contract, right, you're like, oh, I have this. You kind of stop innovating, which is cheesy for a startup to say, but like that's when, like in ed tech in particular, it was like once you got these contracts, they're long-term contracts, especially at university level, right? Super long sales cycle, and it's like they have it, they use it, but then like kind of what's next, right? Then there wasn't as much incentive to say, okay, well. How do we fix this? And you're right. I mean, COVID was a catalyst for a lot of these kinds of things.
Well, and I think that, ed tech investors in general, one of the reasons from a pure business perspective why they are attracted to it is because, at least in higher education, if you can show that you do have a repeatable process and you can sell, they know that you become entrenched. And there's, your, attrition on customers is, if you have a good product, is not that crazy high at all. Yeah. And, that's a great thing in a lot of ways from a business perspective, but it does lend itself to, lazy is not the word, complacency. Yes. Towards complacency, because it's like, this is repeatable, this is all these sorts of things. And, for us, we saw that all these institutions, they were buying software that was built for them, which is great. There's a lot of things that do need to happen to run the business, but there's features that are being built for the tens of people in an office or department somewhere. No one was building something for the thousands of students. And that's where all the power is. That's where all the value is. That's where the voice is. And so if you can genuinely capture that, then not only are you going to do something that a lot of ed tech companies have failed to do, which is sell, from the bottom up in the sense of, if a student demands something, it's going to happen a heck of a lot faster than you just trying to knock on the door of this CIO or this vice president, whoever it may be.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. There's definitely a huge graveyard, even when I think of like coding boot camps and ed tech companies in my space. it's exactly what you said, right? It's that complacency where you find something that works, you sold it, but because our industry is so new, oftentimes like we don't see the like negative outcomes until kind of down the road, right? Where universities are starting to see this, where they're like, oh well, I went through this, terrible school that missold me or whatever, right? And then it's like I didn't get the thing, but you have 5 years, 10 years, where you have this data where for a lot of these like EdTech companies and coding boot camps that are like less than 5 years old, it's like you don't really see that until down the road. But what you are starting to see now in the last like 12 months is like a lot of the ones that found something repeatable, found something that worked, and it initially worked, and then a lot of people started doing it, right? And there's nothing that changed, and then there wasn't any like adaptation after their initial success, and so you kind of if you can't keep changing and improving and making sure that you're doing what the student needs, what industry requires, then you're not going to be able to stay relevant. So then that cycle has gotten a lot faster.
Just listening to that, both points that you all made, a major takeaway for me is that, there was not as much parallel sort of coordination between what higher ed institutions or professional organizations were saying they were wanting out of their students and what they were providing, right? So expecting students to be adaptable, expecting learners to be agile and to really be able to be prepared for what's coming next. And it sounds like major institutions now are really having to not only talk that talk, but walk the walk and become, as institutions, better at learning how to learn and how to provide what's really needed. So that's an exciting thing, I think, for Newchip and for the work that you all are doing. That's going to wrap up our panel discussion for today. It's been a pleasure connecting with you both, listening to your perspectives. You really are running innovative companies, and we're super fortunate to be working with you and learning from you all as well. I hope you all enjoyed tuning into this panel discussion today and enjoy the rest of our demo week content. Please join us for more. Like the video below and share it with your network. Cheers, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.